Chilling new secrets are being revealed about Chris Watts, the dad who brutally killed his pregnant wife and their two adorable daughters.
Daddy is a hero.
Did he admit to you that he murdered his family?
He absolutely did.
In the letters, he wrote that he had tried to kill them the night before. Read that again. He had tried and failed the night before. That means at some point on August 12, 2018, Christopher Watts stood over his daughters while they slept and attempted to smother them. And they survived. They woke up the next morning. They had breakfast. They probably said good morning to the man who had just tried to end their lives 12 hours earlier. And then on August 13th, he tried again. This time, he didn't stop. That detail, which Watts only admitted years later in handwritten letters from prison, doesn't appear in most coverage of this case. Most people know the outline. Colorado dad kills pregnant wife, murders two daughters, dumps the bodies at his oil work site. Terrible, monstrous, case closed. But the outline is not the story. The outline skips the part where a 4-year-old girl named Bella walked into a room, saw her mother's body, and was told by her father that mommy was sick. The outline skips the part where that same little girl fought back, physically fought, before she died. The outline skips the weeks of premeditation. The secret doses slipped into Shanann's food. The practice lies. The man who had mentally rehearsed this so many times that when the moment came, he loaded 3 bodies into his work truck in 3 calm, separate trips, drove to his job site, and then went back to the house and FaceTimed his girlfriend. This is not a case about a man who snapped. This is a case about what a human being looks like when they have hollowed themselves out so completely that the people they created, the people who called them daddy, became nothing more than obstacles to a fresh start. And I need you to stay with me through every part of this, because the most disturbing thing about Christopher Watts is not what he did. It's how invisible he was while he was becoming capable of doing it. Before we go any deeper, if you found this channel today, you need to know that this is what we do here at Mistora Crimes. We don't skim. We don't sensationalize. We go into the dark because the people in these stories deserve more than a 3-minute recap. If that means something to you, please like this video right now, subscribe, and hit the bell. It costs you nothing. For Shanann, for Bella, for Celeste, for the little boy who never got a name on a birth certificate. Let's go. To understand what was lost on August 13th, 2018, you need to know who Shanann Rzusek Watts actually was, because the media coverage often reduced her to a victim, and she was so much more than that. Shanann grew up in North Carolina, and by all accounts, she was the kind of person who filled every room she walked into. She was warm. She was loud in the best way, and she was fiercely devoted to her family. She had dealt with real health struggles. She had lupus, and she had faced a difficult pregnancy with her youngest, Celeste. She knew what it meant to fight for her life. She knew what it meant to love hard and keep going. She found Chris Watts on Facebook in 2010. She later described it as being hesitant at first. She tried to push him away. Actually, she made jokes about it on social media, saying she was grateful he hung around anyway. They married in 2012. They moved to Colorado. They had Bella in 2013, Celeste in 2015, and in 2018 Shanann became pregnant again. A boy. They were going to name him Nico. Shanann was active on social media, and I want to be clear about what that means in this context. Some people, after the murders, use her online presence against her, as though being positive in public somehow made her naive or complicit in her own fate. That is wrong. What those videos actually show us is a woman who was building something. She sold wellness products for a company called Lavelle, and she was good at it. She documented her family's life because she was proud of them. She posted videos of her girls dancing, of birthday parties, of Chris at family dinners. She was transparent and open and joyful. And what we know now is that what she was documenting and what was actually happening inside that marriage were two very different things. The financial pressure was enormous. The family had filed for bankruptcy in 2015. They were living in a 5-bedroom home with a nearly $3,000 monthly mortgage. The stress was real. But here is what matters. Shanann was working through it. She was trying. She was present. She never stopped showing up for those girls or for that marriage. Even when, as we'll soon learn, she had every reason to walk out the door. Now, let's talk about Chris Watts, because understanding him is not about excusing him. It is about recognizing the patterns, the warning signs that people around him either missed or quietly ignored. Chris was described by almost everyone who knew him as quiet, reserved, the kind of man who didn't show much emotion either way. Co-workers said he seemed normal. Friends said he seemed devoted. His own parents would later say, in an interview that came out just before his sentencing, that they believed Shanann had been controlling and had isolated Chris from his family. And while his parents were later forced to walk that back, they admitted at the sentencing hearing they had been misinformed and were looking for answers. That initial instinct to defend him tells you something about how Chris Watts was perceived. Calm, steady, not the type. But here's where things get interesting, and I want you to pay close attention to this. In late June of 2018, just about 6 weeks before the murders, Chris Watts met a woman named Nico through work. She was 30 years old. She worked as an environmental contractor connected to Anadarko Petroleum, the same company Chris worked for. And from the very beginning, Chris told her he was nearly divorced. He said he was looking for a new apartment. He wasn't wearing a wedding ring. He presented himself as a man on the verge of starting over. He was not nearly divorced. Shanann didn't even know there was a problem. That is not a man who snapped. That is not a crime of passion. That is a man who constructed an entirely parallel life, who was in one world with his wife and pregnant with their third child, and simultaneously auditioning for a completely different future with another woman. And when those two worlds started to collide, he made a choice about which one he wanted to survive. And that brings us to the night of August 12th into the early hours of August 13th. Shanann had been away on a business trip. She came home to Frederick just before 2 a.m. on August 13th. A neighbor's home security camera captured her arriving. That same camera would later become one of the most critical pieces of evidence in the case, because it also showed what happened in the hours that followed. By all accounts, Shanann and Chris had an argument that night. Chris would later claim, in multiple different versions of his story, which kept changing, that the argument was about separating, about the marriage being over. He said she reacted by telling him he would never see the girls again. What we know happened next is this. Chris strangled Shanann Watts. He did it with his bare hands, in their bed, for at least 2 minutes. The prosecutor at sentencing was explicit. This was not a sudden, uncontrolled act. It was deliberate. It was sustained. Then Bella came into the room. 4-year-old Bella, who had heard something, or woken up, or just wandered the way little kids do in the middle of the night. She asked what was wrong with her mommy. Chris told her Shanann was sick. He then smothered both of his daughters. When investigators later revealed that Bella had fought back, that she struggled, I want you to understand what that means. A 4-year-old child fought her father for her life, and he kept going. He loaded their bodies into his work truck, making 3 separate trips from the house. He drove to the Anadarko oil site where he worked. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave near one of the tanks. And then he put Bella and Celeste inside the crude oil tanks. The openings, as I said, were 8 inches wide. He had to force them in. He then went to work. He texted colleagues about the site. He acted normally. And then that afternoon, he stood on his front porch and cried for cameras. The investigation moved fast. A neighbor named Nathan Trinistick turned over his surveillance footage, and police watched it with Chris in the room. It showed Chris loading his truck that morning. It showed that Shanann and the girls never left the house. His phone records, his GPS data, his digital footprint. All of it was already unraveling his story before he even sat down for polygraph. He failed it. And then came one of the more chilling moments in this case. Investigators suggested Chris, almost as a gamble, that maybe Shanann had hurt the girls. And something in Chris Watts responded to that. He asked to speak to his father, who had just flown in. They let him. The room was being monitored. And talking to his dad, Chris admitted to killing Shanann, but he tried to put the girls' deaths on her. He said he saw her choking them on the baby monitor. He said he strangled Shanann in a rage over what she'd done to his daughters. It was a lie. Prosecutors knew it almost immediately, and the physical evidence confirmed it. On August 16th, 3 days after the murders, the bodies were found at the Anadarko site. Chris was arrested. His initial lie, that Shanann killed the girls collapsed. On November 6, 2018, Christopher Watts pleaded guilty to 9 charges, including 5 counts of first-degree murder. Shanann's family had made clear they did not want the death penalty pursued. They said that taking another life was not their right to demand. At the sentencing on November 19th, Judge Marcelo Kopkow presided over one of the most emotionally devastating hearings you will ever read about. Shanann's father, Frank Ursek, stood up and looked at the man who had married his daughter and said, "You heartless monster. I trusted you to take care of them, not kill them. You carried them out like trash." Her brother asked, barely able to hold himself together, "What kind of person slaughters the people they love the most?" Chris Watts sat at the defense table, head down, legs shaking. His attorney said he was devastated and sincerely sorry. When Judge Kopkow asked him directly if he wished to make a statement, Chris Watts said 2 words. "No, sir." Judge Kopkow sentenced him to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, 3 consecutive, 2 concurrent. He also received 48 years for the unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy and 36 years for tampering with the bodies. The judge called it, and I want you to hear this exactly, perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime that I have handled out of thousands of cases I have seen. Chris Watts now sits in a maximum security prison in Waupun, Wisconsin, and this is where the story takes one more turn that I don't think gets enough attention. Because in 2021, letters that Watts had written to a pen pal were reported on, and in those letters he admitted things he had never admitted before. He said he had planned the murder for weeks. He said he had attempted to slip OxyContin to Shanann to try to end her pregnancy, believing it would make leaving easier. He said he had tried to smother the girls in their beds first, and initially failed. Weeks of planning. Weeks. So here's what I want to leave you with, because this is a part of true crime that most channels skip over, and it's the part that matters most. Chris Watts was not a monster in the way horror movies show us monsters. He didn't look dangerous. He didn't have a criminal record. He didn't rage or scream or break things. He was quiet. He was a guy who smiled in family photos and called his kids his life on camera. And that is exactly why this case should never stop making us uncomfortable. Because what it forces us to ask is, how do we protect people from the threat that looks like safety? How do we take seriously the slow, quiet building of a double life before it reaches a point of no return? Shanann had reportedly noticed something was off in their marriage. She had told people she was worried. Did anyone around him, see anything? And if they did, was there ever a moment where things could have gone differently? I don't think there are easy answers. But I think asking the questions is the only way to honor what Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico deserved, which was a chance to live. Tell me in the comments, what do you think it is about cases like this that we find so impossible to look away from? Is it the betrayal? The ordinariness of it? The fact that the danger was inside the home? I want to read your thoughts. I read every single one. And if this episode hit you the way these stories always hit me, if you believe that the people we cover here deserve to have their stories told with depth and care, please subscribe to Mistora Crimes right now and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Every share keeps this channel alive, and every view is a small act of remembrance for the people we talk about here. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico, we remember you. See you in the next one.